Okay, in the previous video I might have said that we would dive into the set 6 stuff, but that video was recorded like last weekend, and that was before I knew that Chronojet would happen, and also that Bushra would reveal like ride lines like back after one after another. So we have a lot to talk about, so let's jump into these ride lines as fast as possible in the coming next days, so we can then move a bit back to set 6. So that said, we got a new bunny ride line for Lyrical Monasterio, which essentially reintroduces the Chouchou playstyle, and honestly, it has a lot of promise and could actually be a formidable foe in this current format. So let's take a look at Hazaret, the bunny girl. Stand up, Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we're going to cover a brand new ride line for Lyrical Monasterio, because we have a total of 6 new ride lines, and this is the second one we're going to cover, and that will probably tell you how much content there is to talk about Lyrical Monasterio with this new set. But also, you're probably already aware, there's also a new Brandgate ride line, but that's something we're going to talk about next time. So this time, it's all about bunny girls, and that will bring in the new Chouchou mechanic, or should say, reintroduce the Chouchou playstyle into Lyrical Monasterio, into Standard. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into these cards and see what this playstyle has in store for us, and how it will be playing out in Standard. So first off, a new ride line means a new starter, so we have Fresh Start Hazaret. It's just generic starter, so we can move on to the next one. So for the grade 1, we have Springing Gate Hazaret, and this Hazaret has the effect, although when a unit is rode upon by a grade 2 with Hazaret in its card name, choose up to one grade 2 or less normal unit from your hand, call to the rearguard circle. Until the end of the turn, it gets power plus 2k, and auto on the rearguard circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked a Vanguard, draw a card, and put this unit on the bottom of your deck. So this is great, because this allows you to be aggressive very early on without losing any value. Because there are a couple of downsides of being very aggressive in the early game. One of those being, if your opponent hits his defensive, you just dedicate a card into the field without getting any payoff of it, which is really bad. This essentially negates that downside. So if your opponent hits the defensive trigger, at the very least you can still attack to it, the card will go to the bottom of your deck, you draw into a new card, you don't lose any card advantage. The second thing is that if you're gonna rush, that also opens you up to being rushed back, because you just dedicated cards into the field, so you're gonna have a smaller hand size. This, again, is a way to negate that, because you draw into new cards, so you replenish your hand, so you can still be aggressive without sacrificing the defensive capability of it. And the third one here is that your opponent cannot really damage an IU. So if this is a playstyle that focuses a bit about using counterblast to some extent, by putting those cards back to the bottom of the deck, thus clearing your field, essentially you remove the option of being damaged by your opponent. So those are really good advantage of having this type of skill this early on for just pressuring your opponent a bit more aggressive. And at the same time, this playstyle, and we're going to see that with the grade 3 etc. as well, plays very well into control matchups that just nuke your board, because there's hardly any board to nuke. So this is really good counterplay against a lot of aspects that punish early aggression. And before we go to the grade 2, another very important aspect about this grade 1 is that it gives the unit plus 2k power. Because you need to call a normal unit, which means not a trigger, you most likely at the very least are going to call a grade 1. Most of the grade 1s, not all of them, are 8k. So that means even on turn 2, when you use this effect, if you went second, you can still use and call on an 8k grade 1, and it will still hit into a 10k base, which is really good to be aggressive. But at the same time, if you call it grade 2, that's 10k, it becomes 12k, and with an 8k booster, it at the very least will hit magic number. So even if your opponent hits his defensive, you can still hit over it. But in the context of this deck specifically, it just allows you to use any card if you went first to still hit. So if you run 6k grade 1s, 8k grade 2s, they still are effective 8ks and 10ks, so you can still get the bang for your buck for early aggression. That's the important factor about the 2k that comes into play in the early game. Now moving on to the grade 2, we have Undecided Pure White Hazaret, and this Hazaret has the effect, although when units rode upon by a grade 3 with Hazaret in its card card name, cost soul +1. Choose up to 1 grade 3 or less card from your hand, call to the graveyard circle. If you call, draw a card. So this is essentially just a +1. There's not really anything fancy about it. You're gonna call a card anyway, so you might as well call a card you're going to call and then draw a card into your hand. This is another way to recycle value and recoup the potential loss of calling a card into the field, which is honestly really good. Now, moving up into the grade 3, we're going to see this Chouchou playstyle at full capacity as we have Iridescence Palette Hazoret. And this Hazoret has the effect: act on Vanguard circle once a turn, cost counter +1. Choose up to 5 of your normal unit rearguards until the end of turn. They get power +2k and on rearguard circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked a Vanguard, draw a card, and put this unit on the bottom of your deck. If you chose 3 or more rearguards, this unit gets power +10k until the end of turn. So essentially, all your attacking units are gonna go to the bottom of the deck and you draw into new cards that replenish them. It's essentially the same effect that the grade 1 of the right line has, only this you give it to the entire board, so every unit that could potentially attack will then put itself to the bottom of the deck and redraw into a new card, and your Vanguard will hit for a decent 23k number, thus putting up a decent pressure on the early game. And this has no grade restriction, so you can do this on turn 3 when your opponent is still at grade 2. That's an important factor here. Now, overall, this skill in itself doesn't really show us how powerful this could potentially be. The extra 2k is very nice because, again, that shows us that it can make columns a bit better because it's +4k on an entire column, and it makes like these weird numbers that Lyrical Monasterio has access to at least more normal. So those 11k grade 3s will become 13k, so those 8k grade 2s or the 6k grade 1s becomes normal numbers we're used to, thus making the magic numbers we're used to. But there's other aspect that comes into play here with that particular with that interaction with those numbers, but you will see that once we see a specific support card. But another important thing about this is that this plays well into control matchups. It allows us to recoup losses, be aggressive without losing the potential damage denying and all those things. So basically what we discussed with the grade 1 comes into play with the grade 3. Maybe not in a full board skill because it's very hard to get those boosters in the back row also removed from the field. But at the very least, if they are in the back row, the only thing that will punish that is control options. But you just removed a lot of other options, so honestly, pretty damn good. But to really understand the value of this grade 3, let's take a look at the support cards around it that are made specifically for this card, and then we can really understand where the power of this card lies. So first off, we have a grade 2, and this grade 2 really brings together a lot of aspects of Lyrical Monasterio, and this also shows us why the +2k matters and why the weird numbers actually comes into play here. As we have Adorable Shooter Clan Phaley, and Clan Phaley has the effect, although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle from hand, if you have a Vanguard with Hazoret in its card name, cost, put a grade 2 or less card from your hand into your soul, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 grade 3 card with power 12k or less, a grade 2 card with power 9k or less, or a grade 1 card with power 7k or less, call to the rearguard circle and shuffle your deck. If you did not call, draw a card. So this is where we see where the weird numbers come into play with this archetype, as it allows us to potentially plus. And with this card having on plays effect, it means you can reflood the board quite nicely. And keep in mind, most of those weird power number units are the cards that allow us to call cards from the top of her deck to flood the board a bit. We've seen this with the Kyrie support, though Kyrie uses those cards. And this deck can use those cards as well, only now it has a grade 2 that searches for those cards to some extent, which is great to replenish the board, because that's what you want to do after we remove those cards from the field. But at the same time, in the worst case scenario, this card is just a cycle that gives us soul, because we just put a grade 2 from our hand or a grade 1 or a trigger into the soul and we draw another card. Or we get lucky and we get a specific card that we need. And even if we see a card that fulfills the conditions of this effect, but we don't want it, just not get it and just draw a random card as well. That's the power of this grade 2. This grade 2 is really good in this deck, especially with the fact that we can put it back into the deck and potentially draw it again over and over and over again, essentially using this effect every single turn, which honestly is really good. And keep in mind, you can use this on turn 2, as it doesn't restrict you to have a grade 3 Hazoret. And that means you could potentially call a grade 3 early on, which honestly is not bad. Now that's just a searcher and value card. Let's take a look at the other weird power numbers that directly interact with the mechanic of Hazoret. So first up we have a grade 1, which is a 6k grade 1 in the likes of any color bubble Sharon. And Sharon has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit boosts a rearguard, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Hazoret in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of battle. Then, at the end of battle, cost Soul Bliss 1, choose your back row middle rearguard and move it to an open front row rearguard circle. So this is our multi-attack enabler. It allows us to put the card that's behind our Vanguard into the front row to attack again. Because this directly synergizes with Hazoret, because when you use Hazoret's ability, all the units get plus 2k power, and they get the effect after they attacked, you can put them on the bottom of the deck and draw a card. So you attack with this column, boost it with this grade 1. This grade 1 gets plus 5k. It's already an 8k because of Hazoret, so it's a 13k booster to whatever other attacker in the front row. Then that front row will go to, then that front row unit will go to the bottom of the deck, and then you can move the unit behind your Vanguard to the front row circle. Keep in mind, that doesn't have to be a grade 1. It can be a grade 2 or grade 3 that you just put there to prep for this multi-attack enabler. And now we also can see the value of the grade 2 we just talked about, putting a card into the soul, because that then will fulfill the condition for the cost of this grade 1 that we can use every single turn. So that's the nice synergy between these cards. And this card will most likely stay on the board, because this is not going to attack, and if your opponent doesn't have a removal option, this will allow us to achieve multi-attacks every single turn. Sadly, not 5 attacks, but at the very least 4 attacks, and 3 of those attacks will result into an extra card in their hands, which honestly is really good. Now, another really good card is this grade 2 8k power unit in the likes of Cat's Cradle form Sylphia. And Sylphia has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle once a turn. When your Auto Rearguard is put onto the bottom of your deck during the battle phase, costs Soul Bliss 1, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So an 18k attacker, but during the Hazoret turn it's actually 20k. This is another Soul Blasting card, but with the potential Soul Charge engine, this is sustainable and you can use it whenever you need the extra power. But she has also another effect which combo nicely with Hazoret, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. At the end of battle, this unit attack hit a Vanguard, cost, put the unit on the bottom of your deck, draw a card, and count charge 1. So on hit, it has the same effect as Hazoret, where it refunds itself, removes from the field, and you count charge 1. But during a Hazoret turn, a grade 3 Hazoret turn, this is actually double the value, because the Hazoret effect doesn't require you to put it on the bottom of the deck to draw a card. So essentially, if this thing hits, you can use this effect, put them to the bottom of the deck, draw a card and count charge 1, and then resolve the Hazoret effect that was given to this grade 2 to draw another card, but you cannot put it on the bottom of the deck anymore because it already is at the bottom of the deck, but you do get the extra draw. And because you countercharge, you essentially make the Hazoret effect, which has the cost of a counterblast, essentially for free. So for free, you give your entire board plus 2k, and you give all your units the ability to put them on the bottom of the deck at the end of the battle to draw a card. That's really good. And if this is like the first attacks of your combo, that means they have to guard those probably weaker numbers, which then results in them not banking on a potential defensive trigger to negate all your attacks that you're going to do. That's a really good way to discourage early damage, which honestly is really good. Now, of course, we also want to stack a bit more power on the board, and we have that in the likes of this grade 1, which is Soft and Fluffy Lunch Kaolina, which is a 6k grade 1, but she has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle. When your rearguard is put on the bottom of your deck during your battle phase, if you have a Vanguard with Hazoret in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So unlike the grade 2 we just talked about, this isn't once per turn. So if you have this on the booster on the attack on the other column that you're not going to use first to achieve the multi-attack, this could essentially be as an 18k booster, which makes a pretty decent number on one of the columns. But if we ever get a card that allows us to put another card in the bottom of the deck to then maybe reload a card onto the field or something that allows us to extend even further, this could get even bigger. So there is possibility that this could even be better, but in the current situation, it's an 18k booster, which honestly isn't bad, especially with the fact that we know we have a potential searcher for it, which is pretty decent. And then finally, another card that allows us to put more power on the board is Magic Arrow Ballet Minmai, a brand new grade 3 for the deck, which has the effect on a Rigid Circle. When this unit attacks, choose one of your units in another column, and you may have it get power plus 5k until the end of the turn. If you do, at the end of battle, put this unit on the bottom of your deck. Again, a card that synergizes with the effect of the grade 3 that doesn't conflict with it, and it's basically another free 5k power buff to the field that you can give to your other column, or potentially the unit behind your Vanguard that's going to switch with this unit, so that second attack is going to be at least decent on its own if you don't have like a unit that can give itself power. So, honestly, pretty decent support so far. I think we're going to see more cards. There's also a lot of other cards from the previous support wave that can interact with this, because just like Kyrie, this is a very generic playstyle that just puts cards on the field and attacks with it, swings with it, maybe multi-attacks a little bit, and then puts them all away to draw into more cards. I think a lot of the cards that just basically +1 every single time, those cards that just Superior call the top card of the deck, might really work well with this deck to just put more pressure on the field. The only downside that this deck has is the same as the Chouchou engine. Because you put the cards that you have in hand back into the bottom of the deck, that means you need to draw into more gas every single turn. So the moment you start drawing into not offensive cards, so a lot of triggers, that's where the deck might have some issues. So that's where you probably want those 3+ cards to at least get you out of a sticky situation where you accidentally draw in too few offensive cards. But at the same time, the trade-off for that potential downside is that you have a very good matchup against like control decks, can be very aggressive on the early game without being punished, and all those specific interactions that works well with a relatively hyper-aggressive deck. So overall, this deck for Hazoret looks pretty interesting. We've seen the playstyle before. It has some merit to it. I think in this slower format for standard, it probably has more room to potentially be lethal, unlike what Chouchou was during GR. Chouchou needed like busted strides and effects to actually make it matter in the format. But I think this has more staying power, and with more generic support on the horizon, this could be pretty damn good. But with that said, that's about everything that we have for this ride line today. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of Hazoret for Lyrical Monasterio. Do you think this is honestly a pretty decent playstyle? Is this one of those playstyles that really clicked with you and you might think, you know what, I want to try this deck out? Or maybe I even overlooked a very powerful interaction. Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel, or I think there's something on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!